So level 1 in the Enneagram is, what is your primary type? So this is the question, where does your attention go? And so type number 1 is called the perfectionist or the reformer. And this is someone whose attention goes to what could be improved, what could be made better. So this is the person who, if they take a test out of 100 and they get it back with 95 correct, their attention goes to, well, which 5 did I miss? That's really big in their screen of attention. This is somebody who kind of sees things in black and white, perfect and imperfect. This is the person who might stay up all night long working on a presentation because they really can't sleep if they think that it's not done perfectly. They really have very, very high standards. To the rest of us, this person might feel very, very rigid, very judgmental, but if you could get inside their head, it would break your heart. They are so hard on themselves. And when I talk to, again, in my interview, I'll ask people, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how self-critical are you? They're 8, 9, or 10. And I say, what are you criticizing yourself about? And they'll say everything, what I ate, what I didn't eat, what I said, what I didn't say, where I went, where I didn't go. So these are people who are really quite hard on themselves. Their journey, like to relax their habit of attention, is to go from critical mind to curious mind and eventually to compassionate mind. So compassionate mind is where they leave things in a good enough state, where they're okay with imperfection. They see the beauty in imperfection and they don't feel this drive to try to change things and constantly make them better. So that's kind of the habit of attention for type 1. I will also add, usually when people start to hear about these types, they think, you might hear a little bit of yourself in all of them. That's normal. To be an Enneagram type, you are most of the things most of the time. So every single type I'm going to describe, you'll probably hear 1 or 2 things. You're like, I'm that, I have that. That doesn't make you the Enneagram type. If you feel like you're most of the things most of the time, then that might be your Enneagram type. So just keep that in mind. That's type 1. So type 2 is called the helper, the giver, or the lover. And I describe these are the big hearts of the Enneagram. These are people whose attention goes out to other people. They're very tuned into, what do other people need? How can I be helpful? How can I be useful? How can I be likable and of service? So this is a very other-oriented person. I typically say these are people who are really good hosts and hostesses. They have high emotional intelligence. They remember your birthday. They buy thoughtful gifts. They, know which food you like and who you're friends with, so who you should be seated next to. They're very tuned into all of those things. They're really good at knowing the desires of other people, but they are surprisingly cut off from their own needs and desires. So this is someone who has a really hard time with self-care. Their attention is going to other people, and where they're out of balance is they forget to take care of themselves. And what's actually going on kind of deep in the background is there's often a little bit of subconscious pride. I don't need anything. I'm here to offer help and I'm going to be helpful, but I'm fine. And this is a false narrative. So a lot of 2s at some point in their life, they'll have a breakdown, either a physical, an emotional, or a mental breakdown because they're so overextended helping other people. And that's a big wake-up call and a surprise to them. They often don't notice that they've gotten so out of balance. So their attention is going to how can I be helpful and likable to other people, and their journey to relax the habit of attention is to really develop great self-care. So good self-care tools, and to understand that they are actually at their most powerful when they're taking care of themselves. So that's the type 2. Type 3 is called the achiever or the motivator, and I describe this is like the energizer bunny of the Enneagram. This is the person who's, very goal-oriented, very focused on achievement. They set a goal, they race to the goal, they achieve the goal, they get the award, they put it on the wall, they want to make sure you saw they got that award, and they're off to the next thing. So this is someone who's highly, highly achievement oriented, and they tend to be highly, highly successful because so much of their attention is going towards that. This is someone who usually is quite competitive, and these are people who will admit, it's hard for me to let my children win a board game. I just constantly want to be winning. So this is someone who really's got a competitive edge. And part of what's going on there is this is someone who feels their identity from the outside in. So they don't tend to have a really strong internal compass for how they're doing or even who they are. So they look to the outside world to kind of give them confirmation. So this ends up being someone who, marries the right spouse, drives the right car, lives in the right zip code, went to the right school, and maybe wants to share all of those things with you to make sure that you see that they're a success. Because when you see it, then they feel like, okay, I'm doing well. This is a type that can often be really hard to type in the Enneagram because the personality aligns around a role. So threes are trying to be the best they are in whatever environment they've put themselves in. So for example, I might go to a convent and I'm interviewing a bunch of nuns. And you think, oh, they're the helpful type, they're probably a bunch of type twos. But eventually I'll get to the nun who actually says, I want to pray the hardest. I want to convert the most people. I want to be the best nun. And that's actually a three. And it's this drive to be the best. Kind of on a personal note, I have a friend who is in Venice Beach, California, and he's a three. In Venice Beach, kind of in his environment, like the metric would be, how long have you been unemployed? That's a good thing. Do you have the best pot dealer? That's a good thing. So he might look like a slacker, but he's trying to be the best in his environment. And so you always have to kind of keep in mind that it's the best for whatever environment they're in. And that might not look like official kind of traditional success, but you've got to consider that. It's this desire to be the best. Their growth path is to go from needing all of this external validation and kind of the fraud that can go along with it. A lot of threes will say, I shapeshift. I am not always kind of genuinely me because I'm trying to be the best in whatever environment I'm in. And a lot of threes will say, having a birthday party is a disaster for me because all of my worlds collide and I don't know how to manage it. So for threes, they really grow when they drop that and they come forward as full human beings who also have flaws, who are not always successful, who are not always the best, but instead are always real. And so when they move to true authenticity, that's when they do really, really well. So that's the type three. Type four is called the individualist or the artist. I describe, these are the people who own the emotional spectrum. So they've been up, they've been down, they've been every place in between, and they often are on a daily basis. So this is someone who's feeling a lot of emotional intensity. They're going up, they're going down. While they're having this intensity, they tend to spend more time in the darker emotions. So sadness, despair, melancholy, that's kind of home base for type fours. And a lot of fours will say, I like the intensity. I would actually take a deep depression over a flat, average day, any day of the year. I don't want flat. That feels like death. I'd rather have intensity. And if it has to be dark intensity, I prefer that. So there's a real richness that fours have. I say that we've all gone to our type four friend when we are having an emotional problem. And that is because this is somebody who's emotionally fearless. They've run the whole spectrum. They are not going to be afraid. You can bring the weirdest, darkest, deepest problem you have, and it's probably something a four has already thought about or considered or maybe even experienced. They really can hold the space for the rest of us. While they're great at holding the space for the rest of us, they can fall into depression themselves. So a lot of fours really struggle with depression because their attention is going to what's missing. Why is everyone else happy and I'm not? Why does it seem like there's a lot of focus on what's missing and a lot of questions of identity and authenticity? Am I being real? Have I really presented myself? So a lot of fours at some point in their life will actually rename themselves. And that's where they're trying to kind of take back their identity. There's a lot of focus on this. Fours do really, really well when they take all of this creativity and all of this emotional intensity and they channel it into something that can manifest. So fours will say, when I create something that other people see and understand and appreciate, that is like lifeblood for me. That is extremely healing and it feels really, really good. So this is kind of the way that fours can take all that intensity and use it and share things with the world. So their attention, the out of balance part is going from buying into this emotional intensity a little bit too much, believing every emotion is, really an indicator of something and not acknowledging that emotions come and go and those aren't always the best guideposts. And fours do better when they focus on gratitude, when they stop looking at what they don't have and they begin to really deeply appreciate what they do have. So that's the growth path for the type four. Type 5 is called the investigator, the thinker, or the observer. And I describe this is like the owl of the Enneagram. So this is someone who's got a very boundaried approach to life. These are people that we usually experience as quiet, as reserved, maybe even as robotic. In a social environment, they're often kind of standing the wallflower against the wall, listening, observing, but not engaging. And fives will say the distance between my thoughts and my mouth is long. So they're thinking a lot. It's a very mentally active type, but they're sharing very, very little. Eventually they'll get bored. Eventually they'll get lonely and they'll decide to step in and engage, but that's very anxiety provoking for type fives. They're constantly having a question: should I engage? Should I withdraw? Should I engage? Should I withdraw? And if they don't know what to do, they're going to stay withdrawn. This is somebody who says they're very conscious about resources. And when I say resources, I don't necessarily mean food and water and money even, although they may be focused on those things as well, but energy. So fives are kind of famous for not being spontaneous, wanting to know everything in advance, wanting to plan, wanting to really think through things before they leave the house, for example. And fours will say, or fives will say, for me, starting the day, it's like I start every day with a quarter of a tank of gas, and I've got to figure out, like, how am I going to make it through the day? So they're very, very careful of what they commit to. Their attention goes to scarcity and concerns, kind of feeling like I probably don't have what it takes to make it in the world, so I better minimize my contact with everything. That's where their attention is going. Where they grow is when they relax that habit of attention, and it's called avarice, greed, in the Enneagram. It's not that they're greedy, it's that they don't share. So fives grow a lot when they start to actually share themselves more. So they show up, they share their knowledge, they share their energy, they share their presence, they stop hiding, they stop withdrawing. So that's the growth path for the type 5. Type 6 is called the loyalist or the skeptic, and I describe this is like the African gazelle of the Enneagram. So this is someone who's on alert for where's the lion. This is someone who's scanning for danger. So this is a person whose attention goes to what could go wrong, what could be dangerous, or what could be a threat to my security. They're scanning for that, and it's not an intellectual exercise. They think this is probably going to happen. So that after they identify a threat, they start preparing for that eventual outcome because they believe that's probably going to be what happens. For example, a type 6 might step onto the street and see that, a bus is coming. The rest of us are like, it's a bus, I should step back. The 6 is going to think, the bus is coming, it's going to turn and swerve and hit me. I'm going to go flying, I'm going to hit that tree across the street. Where's the nearest hospital? Is my insurance card with me? And so they might go back and not leave the house until they've got their insurance card with them because they're so convinced that there's going to be a problem when they go out there. It feels very real to them. This is somebody who tends to not trust people easily. These are very, very loyal individuals, so you can only be loyal to so many people, and a lot of 6s will end up having a small group of friends that they've brought forward from early in life because they kind of decide, if you're my friend, we're friends for good, and there's just not that much space for that many of those people. 6s have a complicated relationship with anxiety. It depends on the subtype, but often 6s feel very, very anxious because, again, their mind is kind of assuming this worst case scenario is going to probably happen. But what's ironic and interesting is in the case of an actual emergency, when something really bad does happen, 6s are grace under pressure. It's like they've been waiting for this moment their whole life, and finally it happens. So 6s are actually amazing leaders when something bad happens because they've been waiting for it. They're really ready. So all that anxiety about the future drops off in the face of an actual emergency, which is just interesting to kind of observe if you have 6s in your life. Their attention goes to what could go wrong, so their growth path is when they learn to relax that and kind of trust a little bit more. Trust in their own ability that if something goes wrong, they'll be able to navigate their way out of it. Trust their own inner guidance, stop looking for outside systems to keep them safe, and start to just kind of believe that maybe, even if it's not okay, they would find a way to be okay. So a lot of kind of tuning into their own inner authority and stopping to try to control all these events that they can't control is where 6s grow. Type 7 is almost like the opposite of a type 6. So 6s are looking for what could go wrong, 7s are looking for what could go right. So their attention goes to what could be fun, what could be great, what could be amazing. And I describe these are the rose-colored lenses of the Enneagram. They are truly trapped in sunshine. So it's very easy for a 7 to see what could go right. It is very challenging for them to see what could go wrong. So this can actually get them into kind of dangerous situations because they literally have a blind spot about danger. They just don't notice it. It's not what they see. These are people who are fueled by new experience. They want to try almost anything that they haven't done before. And the 7 psychology is happiness is out there. I don't have it now, but I'm about to have it, but I have to go find it, and it's up to me. So it's a very action-oriented type. And there's kind of a sense that happiness is probably somehow linked to something I haven't done before. So these are people who really are adventurous. They want to try everything because they're pretty sure that thing they're going to try is going to be what leads them to true happiness. This is a misunderstanding. 7s grow when they stop trying and try all these new things and switching and moving, and instead go deep and get really clear and focused and expert in something. But this is hard for 7s to do because to do that you have to go through pain, and 7s are very pain avoidant. It's hard for them to process negative emotion. When something negative starts to come up, their attention usually turns to something else. So the growth path for 7s is to go, they call it from gluttony to sobriety. I like to call it gluttony. It is gluttony for experience, but maybe not sobriety, but instead discernment, where they start to learn what is something that's actually good for me and what is something that's just new, because that can be confusing for 7s. Everything seems good in the mind of a 7. So that's their growth path. Type 8 is called the leader or the boss. This is the bull in the china shop of the Enneagram. So it's called the leader, the boss, the challenger, or the protector. This is someone who comes in big, blunt, loud, direct. What you see is what you get. These are people who have a big, powerful energy. They can be intimidating just by walking in the room. There's no hidden agenda. It would never occur to them to hide an agenda. They're straightforward. And they kind of, subconsciously, sometimes consciously, but usually subconsciously, they use conflict as a way to understand where they stand with someone else. So a lot of 8s, when they first meet someone, they push them. And they're waiting for the person to push back. And if the person doesn't push back, then they push harder. So this is someone who often gets feedback at some point in your life. You're kind of being aggressive. Like, why are you yelling? Why are you so angry? Your coworkers are afraid of you. Your children are afraid of you. Like, what are you doing? The attention goes to power dynamics. So when an 8 walks in a room, they quickly understand he's on top, she's on the bottom. Is he going to be fair? Maybe I need to be on top. Do I need to protect her? They also have a very strong protective trait. So if an 8 sees someone who's vulnerable, who's disenfranchised, who's in need of protection, they will often step in to protect that person. And this is a person who has a lot of difficulty sharing their vulnerable emotions. So if an 8 is sad, or if their feelings have been hurt, it's very difficult for them to share that with people, even people they're close to. What they will share instead is anger. So a lot of times if you see an 8 getting angry, what really happened is vulnerability was triggered, and they go straight to vulnerable, boom, to anger. They grow when they drop that. So the path for 8s is kind of from anger and lust, they call it, to innocence, but it's to kind of get back in touch with that softer side and the innocence of a child, and this idea that you could be vulnerable and it would be safe. 8s started off vulnerable, but they got the message, it's not safe to be vulnerable, so you better put on a bunch of emotional armor, which is what they did, and they have to kind of unlearn that. So that's the journey for the type 8. And then finally, type 9. Type 9 is the peacemaker or the mediator, and this is who I describe as the comfortable armchair of the Enneagram. So this is somebody who gets along with everybody. So these are people who are just gifted at being friendly and getting along. So you can put a 9 in the middle of 2 groups who hate each other. And the 9s, who are very good listeners, they'll turn and they'll listen to what's being said, and they'll really be able to step into the position of the other side. And then they'll turn and hear the exact opposite, and they can hear that as well. And so they're very good at actually being able to broker middle ground, remediation, anything that kind of peace almost, because they're such good listeners that each side feels heard. They're great at listening to other people, but they have a really hard time connecting with themselves. So they often step off their own center. And a lot of 9s will look up at some point in their life and think, wait a minute, how did I get here? I spent all this time making sure my spouse was happy, my parents were happy, my boss was happy. I've done everything everyone else wanted to do. I haven't done any of my own things, and I don't even know what those are anymore. So they can really lose themselves. Nines don't like conflict. It's very, very anxiety provoking for them, and a lot of nines will say, I feel like I vanish in the face of a conflict. So they'll give up things that are important to them to avoid conflict, and they don't love change. So this is someone who thinks of change in terms of years and decades. A nine might start a job that they really don't like, and they're pretty clear they don't like it after month 2 or 3, and 10 years later they're in that same job because the mind emphasizes all the reasons not to change. So a nine mind would say, okay, you don't love this job, doesn't really have a future for you, but it's a great commute. I like my coworkers. There's a really good lunch spot across the street. So the mind starts to kind of give a lot of weight to these kind of smaller priorities, and it misses the larger priorities. So for nines, this is considered the most powerful type in the Enneagram when they wake up to their power, and sloth or narcotization is kind of the thing that nines need to work against. Their growth path is when they go from sloth to right action. So when they step into their power and they get clear on their priorities and they go after it, this is an extremely effective, extremely powerful type. But they cut off from that. So that's the kind of work that nines need to do. So that's the habit of attention goes towards harmony and away from conflict. And what nines really need to learn is healthy conflict, because healthy conflict allows them to advocate for themselves. So that's kind of an overview of the very basic 9 types. So I'm going to stop there with